My teenage son yelled, "You're pathetic. Coach Johnson is more of a father to me." I was devastated by the $1,500 sports camp bill. Who signed every check? When his coach told him the truth, he begged my forgiveness. The words hit me like a physical blow, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. My 16-year-old son Marcus stood in our kitchen doorway, his basketball bag slung over one shoulder, his face twisted with the kind of rage only teenagers can muster. "You're pathetic," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. "Coach Johnson is more of a father to me than you'll ever be. At least he shows up for me. At least he cares." I sat frozen at the kitchen table, my hands still resting on the stack of bills I'd been sorting through, the fluorescent light above casting harsh shadows across the papers. The top invoice caught my eye even as my son's words echoed in my ears. Elite Basketball Summer Intensive Camp, $1,500 due in 3 days. It was the third camp this year, and my bank account was already stretched thinner than tissue paper. My voice, when I finally found it, came out flat and controlled, a skill I'd learned in the 3 years since my wife Sarah had passed. "Is that what you think, Marcus? That Coach Johnson cares more?" But he was already storming out, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor, the door slamming so hard behind him that Sarah's framed photo rattled on the wall. I sat alone in the sudden silence, staring at that photo, Sarah laughing at some joke I'd made, Marcus as a 13-year-old tucked under her arm, all of us unaware that the cancer growing inside her would steal her from us in just 6 months. The house felt impossibly empty, the way it always did after Marcus left for practice. I picked up the camp invoice again, running my thumb across the elegant letterhead. Johnson's Elite Basketball Academy, it read, with a logo that probably cost more to design than I made in a week at the factory. Below that, in Coach Johnson's distinctive handwriting, a personal note. "David Marcus has exceptional potential. This camp could be the difference between a good player and a college scholarship. I know things are tight, but some investments are worth any sacrifice." Coach J, I almost laughed at the irony. Coach Johnson knew things were tight because Marcus had undoubtedly told him. Probably during one of their many heart-to-heart conversations that my son bragged about at dinner, when he bothered to come home for dinner at all. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, scrolling through the evidence of my sacrifices. What, $500 for spring camp in March, plus $200 for the winter intensive, $800 for private coaching sessions, $2,000 for tournament travel and hotels, each payment linked to extra shifts at the plant. My back screaming as I operated machinery meant for younger men, my hands going numb from the repetitive motion, coming home to an empty house because Marcus was at another team bonding event with Coach Johnson. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. I wandered through our house like a ghost, past Marcus's room where his door displayed a "Do Not Disturb Champion in Training" sign that Coach Johnson had given him. Through the crack under the door, I could see the blue glow of his phone screen, probably texting his teammates about what a loser his dad was. I continued down the hall to what used to be Sarah's craft room, now converted into a shrine of Marcus's basketball achievements. Trophies lined the shelves, each one gleaming in the moonlight streaming through the window. Most Valuable Player, All-State Team, Rising Star Award. Accomplishments that filled me with pride even as they reminded me of every game I'd missed while working overtime to pay for the training that earned them. I picked up one of the smaller trophies from when Marcus was 8, just starting in the youth league. The inscription read, "Most Improved Player, Marcus Chen 2016. I remember that day perfectly. Sarah was already sick but hiding it well, and we'd sat in those uncomfortable metal bleachers cheering until our throats were raw. After the ceremony, little Marcus had run to us, trophy held high, and jumped into my arms. "Daddy, did you see my shot? The one where I jumped really high?" I'd spun him around while Sarah laughed and took pictures. "I saw every second, buddy. You were amazing." Now that same boy told anyone who would listen that I'd never supported his dreams. I made my way to the garage, flicking on the harsh overhead light that illuminated my makeshift home office. Really just an old desk squeezed between boxes of Christmas decorations and Sarah's things I still couldn't bear to donate. I opened my laptop and began what I should have done months ago, investigating Coach Mike Johnson. His social media presence was extensive and carefully curated. Instagram showed him at expensive restaurants with his boys, as he called them, always picking up the check with a flourish. Facebook featured inspirational quotes about father figures and mentorship, with comments from parents thanking him for stepping up for their sons. Twitter showcased his connections to college scouts and professional players, but it was LinkedIn that made me pause. His employment history showed he'd moved through 4 different schools in the past 8 years, each stint lasting about 2 years before he moved on to a better opportunity. A pattern was emerging, one that made my stomach tighten with suspicion. I dug deeper, finding parent forums and discussion boards. Most comments were glowing, but buried in older threads I found something interesting. A parent from his previous school in Ohio. Johnson left suddenly mid-season. There were rumors about financial irregularities, but nothing was ever proven. Another from Indiana. Great coach, but the program costs spiraled out of control. Lots of mysterious fees and required donations. I bookmarked everything and checked the clock, 3:47 a.m. In 2 hours, I'd need to be up for my shift. The next morning played out in our new normal routine. Marcus didn't come down for breakfast, so I left his usual protein shake in the fridge with a note. Have a good day at practice. Love, Dad. The love part was probably too much, but Sarah would have wanted me to keep trying. At the factory, my supervisor, Carl, noticed my distraction immediately. Everything okay, Dave? You seem off today. Carl was a good man, divorced with 2 grown kids who barely spoke to him, so he understood complicated father-son relationships. Just teenager stuff, I muttered, adjusting my safety goggles. Marcus is going through a phase, Carl snorted. My boy went through a phase for 10 years. Cost me my marriage and my savings account. That basketball coach of his still around? Johnson? I looked up sharply. You know Coach Johnson? Carl's expression darkened. My nephew played for him 2 schools ago. My sister took out a second mortgage to pay for all the camps and special training. Kid didn't even make varsity in college. Johnson disappeared right after some parents started asking questions about where all the fundraising money went. The machinery roared to life before I could ask more questions, but Carl's words echoed in my mind all morning. During my lunch break, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of eating my sandwich in the break room, I drove to the high school. The gym was alive with the sound of squeaking sneakers and bouncing balls. Through the window, I watched Marcus practicing free throws, his form perfect after years of training. Coach Johnson stood nearby, arms crossed, calling out encouragement. That's my star player. You're going places, Marcus. Remember, champions aren't made by their circumstances, they're made by their choices. You chose to rise above your situation. The implication was clear. Marcus's situation was me, and he was rising above having a pathetic father. I watched for another 10 minutes, noting how Johnson touched Marcus's shoulder, ruffled his hair, all the casual affection I'd tried to show my son only to be shrugged off. When practice ended, I waited in the parking lot, leaning against my beat-up Honda Civic that Marcus was too embarrassed to be seen in anymore. Johnson emerged with his usual swagger, designer workout clothes and expensive sneakers, probably worth more than I made in a month. He saw me and his smile became practiced, political. David, great to see you, man. We missed you at the last 3 games, but hey, someone's got to pay the bills, right? The casual dismissal of my absence, framed as understanding, was masterful. No wonder Marcus fell for it. We need to talk about the camp fees, Mike, I said quietly, not moving from my car. Johnson's smile widened, showing those perfectly whitened teeth. Of course. Marcus is really flourishing. This camp could mean college scouts, David. Full rides to Division I schools. We're talking about changing his whole future here. I pulled out my phone, showing him my payment history. I've paid for every camp, Mike, every single one. Plus equipment, travel, private sessions. Nearly $50,000 in 3 years. Johnson's expression shifted slightly. A micro-expression of surprise quickly covered. Well, that's what good fathers do, David. They invest in their children's futures. I took a step closer, noting how he subtly stepped back. Funny thing, though. Marcus seems to think you're more of a father to him than I am. Wonder how he got that idea. Johnson adjusted his whistle nervously, the first crack in his confident facade. Listen, David, the boy needs emotional support, not just financial. If you can't provide that, I cut him off with a laugh that had no humor in it. Emotional support? Is that what you call telling him I don't care? That I'm too busy for him? That real fathers show up? Johnson's face flushed. I never said, But I was already walking away, calling over my shoulder, "I'll be at dinner tonight." The team dinner at Romano's, the one I supposedly couldn't make. I heard him call after me. Something about it being a closed event, but I kept walking. That evening, I arrived at Romano's restaurant 30 minutes early. I knew the owner, Tony, from high school, and he greeted me warmly. "Dave, long time. You here for the basketball team thing?" I nodded, and he showed me to the bar where I could watch the private dining room being set up. "Your boy's quite the player," Tony said, pouring me a coffee. "Johnson brings the team here every month. Big spender. Always pays cash." That detail lodged in my brain as I watched the long table being arranged with place cards. There was no card for me, of course. I was the absent father, the one who never showed up. When the team started arriving, I stayed at the bar, watching. Marcus came in laughing with his teammates, all of them in matching team jackets that cost $200 each. I knew because I'd paid for Marcus's. Johnson arrived last, making an entrance, high-fiving the boys, charming the parents who'd come. That's when I stood up and walked over. The conversation died as everyone noticed me. Marcus froze, his face cycling through emotions, shock, embarrassment, anger. "Dad, what are you doing here?" His voice cracked like it had this morning, but now with confusion instead of rage. Johnson recovered quickly, ever the smooth operator. "David decided to join us tonight. We can certainly squeeze in another chair." The false warmth in his voice would have been convincing if I hadn't been watching for it. The other parents looked confused. They knew me by reputation only. The father who never showed up, who was always working, who didn't care. Mrs. Chen whispered something to Mrs. Rodriguez, probably wondering why the absentee father had suddenly appeared. I took the hastily added seat at the end of the table, Marcus as far from me as possible, refusing to make eye contact. The dinner progressed with forced normalcy, Johnson holding court, telling stories about the boys' accomplishments, their bright futures. Then Mr. Patterson, whose son Tyler was Marcus's best friend, mentioned the camp. Thank God for the anonymous sponsor covering half the costs, right? $1,500 is steep, but $750 is manageable. Everyone nodded in agreement except me. I set down my water glass carefully. "Anonymous sponsor?" I asked, my voice carrying across the table. Johnson's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Well, local businesses, community support. It takes a village, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Funny, I don't see any partial payments. Just full amounts. Every time. $1,500 for spring camp, $1,200 for winter intensive, $800 for—" "David, this isn't the time or place," Johnson interrupted, his voice tight. But Mrs. Chen was looking at her phone now, too. "Wait, I paid full price, too. You told me the sponsor only covered certain families." Mr. Rodriguez added, "I paid full price and made an additional donation for families who couldn't afford it." The atmosphere shifted palpably. Parents were pulling out phones, checking bank statements, comparing notes. I continued, my voice staying calm and level. "I've worked 16-hour shifts to pay for every camp, every piece of equipment, every opportunity. $47,000 over 3 years?" I slid my phone across the table, the payment history visible to anyone who wanted to look. Marcus's teammate Jake spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Coach told us your dad refused to pay, Marcus. Said that's why you had to do extra fundraising, the car washes and stuff." Marcus's face had gone pale, his eyes darting between Johnson and me. "That's not—" "Coach, tell them he's lying." "Tell them!" But Johnson was already standing, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is inappropriate, David. You're embarrassing your son, making a scene. If you have concerns about the program finances, we can discuss them privately." But the dam had broken. Mrs. Patterson was scrolling through her phone. "Mike, I donated $5,000 last month for new equipment." "Where is that equipment?" Mr. Kim added. "I gave $3,000 for the training facility upgrade you mentioned, the one that never happened." Tony, the restaurant owner, had approached our table, sensing trouble. I stood as well, pulling out my wallet to pay for my meal. "I did some research today," I said, addressing the table but looking at Johnson. "Interesting how your personal training business is registered at the same address as the school's athletic fund. Same bank account, too. Also interesting how you've moved through 4 schools in 8 years, always leaving suddenly, always with vague explanations." Johnson's face had gone from red to white. "You don't understand how these programs work, David. The complexity of managing funds, the need for flexibility. I understand embezzlement. I said flatly. I understand fraud. I understand manipulation. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus stood up so fast his chair tipped over. Stop it, just stop. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to ruin everything? I'm not trying to ruin anything, son. I'm trying to show you the truth. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying, spreading papers on the table. Bank statements showing every payment. Work schedules showing every overtime shift. Emails from Johnson to other parents with different stories about costs and scholarships. A pattern of financial irregularities at his previous schools. Johnson was backing toward the door now. Marcus, don't listen to him. Your father is jealous of our relationship, of what we've built. What we built. My voice finally showed emotion. The anger I'd been suppressing for months breaking through. My son tells me I'm pathetic while you take credit for everything I've sacrificed for. You've been stealing from these families while turning their kids against them. Marcus ran from the restaurant and I found him in the parking lot, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. I approached slowly, remembering how Sarah used to handle his emotional moments, give him space but stay close. I sat down on the curb a few feet away, not touching, just present. The evening air was cool, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. We sat in silence for several minutes before Marcus spoke, his voice muffled by his hands. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something? I considered my words carefully. Would you have believed me? 6 months ago, when you started saying Johnson was like a father to you, would you have listened if I'd accused him of stealing? Marcus lifted his head, his face streaked with tears. He said you didn't care. He said you chose work over me. He said real fathers show up, that they prioritize their children over money. I laughed, but it was bitter, tired. I missed games because I was earning money for your dreams. Every missed dinner was overtime for your equipment. Every weekend I wasn't there, I was taking extra shifts so you could have the best training. Marcus wiped his nose with his sleeve, a gesture so childlike it made my heart ache. The Jordans I wanted for my birthday. 3 double shifts, I confirmed. The shooting camp last summer. I sold my father's watch. The one Grandpa left me. Marcus started sobbing again, harder this time. I told everyone you were pathetic. I said horrible things. At school, online, to anyone who would listen. I said Coach Johnson saved me from having a deadbeat dad. The words hurt, but not as much as the pain in his voice. I finally moved closer, putting my arm around his shoulders. He didn't pull away. You were angry about losing Mom. Johnson gave you someone to blame. It's easier to be angry than sad. Marcus leaned into me, something he hadn't done in years. Mom would be so disappointed in me. No, I said firmly. Mom would understand. She always said you had my stubborn streak. She also said you had her ability to admit when you were wrong. We sat there as the parking lot slowly emptied. Other families leaving the restaurant in various states of shock and anger. Through the window I could see Johnson still inside, surrounded by parents demanding answers. What's going to happen to him? Marcus asked. I pulled out another document from my jacket. The school board will receive my full report tomorrow morning. The other parents are already organizing. His coaching career is over, at least at this school. Marcus straightened up, panic in his eyes. My basketball career is over too. No coach, no team, no college scouts, and I shook my head. No, your career with a corrupt coach is over. Your talent is still yours. It always was. The next few days were a whirlwind of revelations and reckonings. The story spread through the school like wildfire. Coach Johnson hadn't shown up for practice, and the principal had called an emergency meeting. I attended with Marcus, who could barely look anyone in the eye. The principal, Dr. Washington, was a no-nonsense woman who'd been suspicious of Johnson's program costs but hadn't had proof until now. She announced that a preliminary investigation had revealed financial irregularities spanning 2 years. Johnson had diverted nearly $75,000 in parent donations to personal accounts. The room erupted in angry voices, but Dr. Washington raised her hand for silence. We'll be conducting a full audit. Any parent who made donations or payments above the standard fees should submit their records. We'll also be bringing in counselors to help the students process this betrayal of trust. One by one, parents stood to share their stories. Mrs. Kim revealed that Johnson had told her son his parents were too cheap to invest in his future, while she'd actually paid double fees thinking it would help other families. Mr. Thompson discovered his equipment. Donations had funded Johnson's vacation to Hawaii. He'd found the Instagram posts with dates matching his payments. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. My son was manipulated into believing I didn't care about him. The financial theft is criminal, but the emotional manipulation is unforgivable. After the meeting, something unexpected happened. Marcus's teammates surrounded him, but instead of blame or mockery, they shared similar stories. Jake admitted. He told me my mom was jealous of my success, that she didn't want me to surpass her achievements. Tyler added, said my dad was threatened by how close we were, that he was trying to sabotage my future. Another boy, quiet Kevin, who barely spoke, whispered. He said my grandparents were too old to understand modern basketball, that their advice would hold me back. They raised me. They're all I have. Marcus looked around at his friends, his team, and realized the pattern. Johnson had systematically turned each boy against their support system, isolated them, made them dependent on him for validation and guidance. It was textbook manipulation, the kind of psychological abuse that left no visible bruises but scarred just the same. That afternoon, Marcus found me in the garage where I was working on an old car, a 1967 Mustang that had been my project before Sarah got sick, then abandoned like so many things. "Dad, can you teach me about engines again?" he asked hesitantly. "I remember when I was little you used to let me hand you tools." I looked up, surprised. "You remember that?" Marcus nodded, picking up a wrench. "I remember a lot of things. I forgot to remember them, if that makes sense." I handed him a rag. It makes perfect sense. Sometimes we need distance to see what was always close. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of mechanical work soothing. Then Marcus said, "I need to tell you something. Coach Johnson had me write a letter for the camp, a testimony about how the program saved me. He wanted me to specifically mention how you failed me, how he stepped in when you wouldn't." My hand stilled on the engine. Marcus continued. "He gave me talking points, said it would help other kids with difficult family situations get scholarships. He made it sound noble, like I was helping others by sharing my story. I forced myself to keep working, to not show how much this revelation hurt." "Did you send it?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showed me a draft email. The subject line read, "How Coach Johnson became the father I needed." The content was worse than I'd imagined, painting me as neglectful, uninterested, choosing work over family. But at the bottom, the send button had never been pressed. "I couldn't do it," Marcus said quietly. "Every time I tried, I heard Mom's voice saying to trust my gut. Something felt wrong. Now I know why." I set down my tools and really looked at my son. "That took courage, Marcus. Even when you were angry at me, even when you believed his lies, something in you knew the truth." Marcus's eyes filled with tears again. "I want to make it right. I want to pay you back. Every penny." I shook my head. "Your mother would say that money was invested in you. The return I want is seeing you become the man she believed you'd be." Marcus nodded, then said words I hadn't heard in 3 years. "I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I forgot to show it." I pulled him into a hug, grease-stained hands and all. That weekend, Marcus asked me to drive him somewhere but wouldn't say where. As we pulled into Riverside Cemetery, I understood. Marcus hadn't been here since Sarah's funeral, always finding excuses when I suggested visiting. We walked in silence to her grave, the headstone still looking too new despite the 3 years that had passed. Sarah Chin, beloved wife and mother, her light shines on. Marcus knelt in front of the stone, placing his hand on the cold granite. "Hi, Mom, I know it's been a while. I was angry at you for leaving. Dad probably knew, but he never said anything." He paused, gathering himself. "I messed up, Mom. I let someone turn me against Dad. You always said we were alike, stubborn and proud. I was too proud to see the truth, too stubborn to admit I might be wrong." I stood back, letting him have this moment with his mother. "Dad never stopped being the father you loved. He just had to be mother and father both, and I made it impossible. I said things, terrible things, the kind of things that can't be taken back, only forgiven." A breeze rustled the trees, and for a moment it felt like Sarah's presence. Marcus continued. "Coach Johnson had me believing Dad didn't care, but the truth is Dad cared so much he nearly broke himself trying to give me everything. While I was calling him pathetic, he was working 16-hour shifts. While I was bragging about my real father figure, Dad was selling Grandpa's watch to pay for my camp. Marcus stood, facing me with red-rimmed eyes. Mom always said you were the strongest man she knew. Not because you could lift heavy things or win fights, but because you could carry pain without letting it make you bitter. I understand that now. We stood together at Sarah's grave, father and son, the distance between us finally bridged. She would be proud of you, I said quietly. Not for the basketball or the trophies, but for this. For having the courage to see the truth and speak it. As we walked back to the car, Marcus said, I want to testify. If there's a trial, I want people to know what Johnson did. Not just the money, but the way he destroyed families. I nodded, knowing this was his choice to make. It won't be easy. His lawyer will try to make you look like a confused kid. Marcus's jaw set in that stubborn way that was pure Sarah. Let them try. I know what happened. I know what he did to us, to all of us. The investigation moved quickly once the full scope of Johnson's deception became clear. The state attorney's office got involved. Forensic accountants traced the money, and within a month, formal charges were filed. Embezzlement, fraud, theft by deception, the list was extensive. But it was the psychological manipulation that made the case notable. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Morris, told us this was one of the clearest cases of financial exploitation through emotional manipulation she'd seen. He identified vulnerable families, single parents, widowed parents, divorced parents, and systematically turned the children against the remaining parent while draining their bank accounts. It's predatory behavior of the worst kind. The trial date was set for 3 months out, giving us time to prepare. Marcus threw himself into documenting everything he remembered, every conversation, every manipulation. He reached out to former players from Johnson's previous schools, finding a pattern going back years. One boy from Indiana, now in college, told Marcus he did the same thing to me. Made me hate my mom while she was working 3 jobs to pay for his camps. I didn't realize until I was older. We reconciled, but we lost years. With Johnson gone, the school brought in Coach Elena Martinez, a retired college coach with 30 years of experience and a reputation for integrity. At her first practice, she gathered the team and their parents in the gym. I want to be clear about something, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen it all. Basketball is a game. Family is forever. If I ever hear any of you disrespecting your parents, you're benched. I don't care if you're the star player or the water boy. She looked directly at Marcus. I heard about what happened with Johnson. That ends now. Parents are welcome at every practice, every team meeting, every event. Basketball is a family sport, and I mean that literally. She instituted new policies. Transparent finances with quarterly reports to parents. No fees beyond the basic registration. Fundraising that went directly to the school account. Not private ones. If a family can't afford something, we figure it out together. No child sits out because of money. The team dynamics changed immediately. Without Johnson's toxic influence, the boys played differently. Looser, more joyful. Supporting each other instead of competing for the coach's approval. Parents started coming to practices, not just games. I took time off work when I could, sitting in the bleachers with my laptop, doing paperwork while watching Marcus play. The difference in Marcus was remarkable. Without the constant pressure and manipulation, his game actually improved. He played with a freedom I hadn't seen since he was younger, before Sarah got sick, before Johnson got his hooks in. College scouts who came to watch noticed. One pulled me aside after a game. Your son has real talent, but more importantly, he's got character. We've been following the situation with the previous coach. The way Marcus has handled it, taking responsibility, supporting his teammates, that's what we look for. The scout asked about our family situation, and Marcus, overhearing, jogged over. This is my dad, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. He's worked factory jobs his whole life to support my dreams. Never missed a payment, never complained about the cost. Even when I didn't deserve it, even when I was... He paused, swallowing hard. Even when I was calling him pathetic, he kept showing up for me in the ways that actually mattered. The scout made notes, nodding. Strong family foundation. That matters more than statistics. After he left, Marcus turned to me. I meant that, you know. Every word. I ruffled his hair, something I hadn't done in years. I know, son. I know. The trial arrived faster than expected. The courthouse was packed. Angry parents, curious media, former players from Johnson's previous schools. The story had gained regional attention. High school coach embezzled funds while destroying family bonds was the headline that seemed to stick. I testified first, presenting financial records, bank statements, work schedules. I kept my testimony factual, letting the numbers speak for themselves. But when the prosecutor asked about the impact on my family, I had to pause. My son and I lost 3 years. 3 years where he believed I didn't care about him. Where I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove I did. You can't put a price on that kind of loss. Johnson's lawyer tried to paint me as a jealous father, resentful of another man's influence on my son. Isn't it true, Mr. Chen, that you were often absent from games and practices? Yes, I admitted. I was working overtime to pay for the camps and training Coach Johnson insisted were essential. But you chose work over attending your son's activities? I chose to pay for my son's activities. There's a difference between choosing work and needing to work. The lawyer pressed on, but I stayed calm, remembering Sarah's advice about keeping your cool when it mattered most. But it was Marcus's testimony that silenced the courtroom. He sat in the witness chair, looking younger than his 16 years but speaking with a maturity born from hard lessons. Coach Johnson identified my vulnerability, he began, his voice clear. My mom had died 3 years ago. I was angry, hurt, looking for someone to blame. He gave me a target, my dad. He'd say things like, a real father would be here, or, if your dad really cared, he'd find a way to make it work. Small comments that built up over time. The prosecutor asked him to elaborate. Marcus took a breath. He isolated me from my dad systematically. If my dad came to a game, Coach would barely play me, then say it was because I was distracted by trying to impress someone who didn't really understand basketball. If my dad missed a game, Coach would make a big deal about being my substitute father, making sure everyone heard it. He created a no-win situation for my dad and made me believe it was Dad's fault. Did you believe Coach Johnson cared about you? The prosecutor asked. Marcus's voice hardened. I believed what he wanted me to believe. But care doesn't come with a price tag. My dad paid $50,000 over 3 years, while Coach Johnson paid nothing but compliments. Looking back, I can see who actually cared. Johnson's lawyer tried to shake Marcus's testimony. You were a grieving child who found comfort in a mentor. Isn't it possible you're now rewriting history to deal with your guilt about how you treated your father? Marcus didn't flinch. I'm not rewriting anything. I have texts from Coach Johnson telling me not to mention the financial assistance he was supposedly providing. I have emails where he asked me to write testimonials about how he saved me from my home situation. I have witnesses who heard him tell me my dad was pathetic. That's not mentorship. That's manipulation. You seem very well prepared, very coached in your responses, the lawyer suggested. Marcus actually laughed. You mean like how Coach Johnson coached me to lie about my father? No, sir, this is just the truth. It took me too long to see it, but now I do. When asked if he had anything else to add, Marcus looked directly at Johnson. You stole more than money. You stole relationships, trust, time that families can't get back. While my dad was working himself into the ground to pay for my dreams, you were taking vacations with the money parents donated. But worse than that, you made me believe my father didn't love me. That's not coaching. That's abuse. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Johnson was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the families he'd defrauded. As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. Marcus stepped up to the microphones, composed despite everything. Coach Johnson made me believe my father didn't care about me. He used my grief over losing my mother to turn me against the only parent I had left. While my dad was working overtime to pay for my dreams, Johnson was telling me he didn't care. That's not just theft. That's psychological abuse that tears families apart. The story went viral within hours. My phone buzzed with messages from parents across the country sharing similar experiences with coaches, teachers, mentors who'd exploited their positions. Marcus decided he wanted to do something with this attention. Within a week, he'd started a podcast called Real Fathers, Real Talk, where he interviewed parents about their sacrifices and kids about recognizing manipulation. The first episode was just Marcus and me, talking honestly about everything that had happened. It got over 1 million downloads in the first month. 6 months after the trial, life had found a new rhythm. Marcus still played basketball, still loved the game, but it no longer consumed our entire existence. Coach Martinez had built a program based on balance, sports, academics, family, all given equal weight. The team was having its best season in years, playing with a joy that had been missing under Johnson's regime. College scouts were interested, but now Marcus evaluated them as much as they evaluated him. "I want a program that values integrity," he told one recruiter. "I've seen what happens when winning becomes everything." The recruiter, an older man with kind eyes, nodded. "Son, the fact that you know to ask that question tells me you're exactly the kind of player we want." That evening, Marcus found an envelope on his pillow. Inside were receipts, every payment I'd ever made for basketball. Thousands of dollars documented in faded ink and crumpled papers. A note was attached in my handwriting. "You wanted to pay me back. Consider this your loan statement. Payment required. Be the father to your children that you now know I tried to be to you. Show up in whatever way you can, love them through their anger, and never let anyone convince them you don't care. That's all the repayment I need. Love, Dad." Marcus came to find me in the garage where I was back to working on the Mustang. He held the envelope with trembling hands. "Dad, it's the past," I said, not looking up from the engine. "What matters is what we do going forward." Marcus picked up a wrench, sliding under the car next to me like he used to when he was 7. "Tell me about this engine again, from the beginning." As I explained the mechanics, pointing out each component, I could feel Sarah's presence, her approval of this moment. We worked until late, grease under our fingernails, solving problems together. When we finally called it a night, Marcus said, "I'm going to frame that note. Put it next to Mom's picture, so I never forget." "Forget what?" I asked. "That love isn't always visible. Sometimes it's in the overtime shifts, the missed games that paid for equipment, the silence when you wanted to scream. Sometimes love looks like sacrifice that nobody sees." He paused at the garage door. "I see it now, Dad. All of it." A year later, Marcus graduated high school with honors and a full basketball scholarship to a university known for both its athletic program and academic excellence. At the graduation ceremony, he was asked to give a speech as class salutatorian. He stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces and began, "3 years ago I lost my mother to cancer. In my grief and anger, I also nearly lost my father to lies and manipulation. I let someone convince me that the man working 16-hour shifts to pay for my dreams didn't care about me. I called him pathetic while he was selling family heirlooms to fund my training. I believed a con artist over the evidence of a lifetime of love." He found my face in the crowd and continued, "My father taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up, admitting when you're wrong, and making things right. He showed me that love doesn't always look like presence at every game. Sometimes it looks like absence because someone is working to make those games possible. To all the parents here who've sacrificed in ways your children don't yet understand, know that one day they will. And to my fellow graduates, don't wait as long as I did to see the love that's been there all along." The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. My son, our son, Sarah's and mine, had become the man we'd hoped he would be. Not perfect but honest, not without mistakes but willing to own them. That night we had a small celebration at home, just family and close friends. Marcus pulled me aside at one point, leading me to the backyard where we could talk privately. "Dad, I need to tell you something. The scout from state offered me a position as a peer counselor for incoming freshmen. They want me to help identify and prevent the kind of manipulation Johnson did. They said my experience in the podcast make me uniquely qualified." I felt a surge of pride. "That's amazing, Marcus. You'll help a lot of kids." He nodded, then added, "They also want you to come speak to the Parents Association about recognizing signs of financial and emotional exploitation in youth sports." I was surprised. "Me? I'm just a factory worker who figured out his kid was being conned." Marcus shook his head. "You're a father who fought for his son even when that son was fighting against him. That's exactly who needs to speak." As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Marcus and I found ourselves in the driveway with his basketball. Without discussing it, we started playing one-on-one, something we hadn't done since he was 12. The ball echoed in the quiet suburban night, punctuated by our laughter when I actually managed to score. "Still got it, old man," Marcus teased, passing me the ball. "Got it from somewhere," I replied, attempting a shot that actually went in. Marcus retrieved the ball, dribbling it thoughtfully. "You know what Johnson never understood? This. Just playing because it's fun because we're together. Everything with him was about the next level, the next achievement. He never just played. We continued until we were both winded, finally sitting on the porch steps like we used to when Sarah would call us in for dinner. "I miss her," Marcus said suddenly. "Every day, but especially moments like this. She would have loved seeing us together again." "She does see it," I said with quiet certainty. "Wherever she is, she sees it." The podcast had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. Marcus interviewed families from across the country, exposing patterns of exploitation in youth sports, arts, academic programs. He partnered with a nonprofit to create resources for parents and kids. The episode that got the most response was also the simplest. Just Marcus reading the letter he'd never sent, the one Johnson had wanted him to write about me. Then he read a new letter, one he'd written himself. "Dear Dad, Coach Johnson wanted me to write about how he saved me from you. The truth is you saved me from him even when I couldn't see it. You worked jobs that broke your body to pay for my dreams. You absorbed my anger without returning it. You investigated the truth when everyone else accepted the lies. You loved me when I was unlovable. That's not pathetic. That's heroic. Your son, Marcus." The episode ended with Marcus saying, "If you're listening to this and you've pushed away someone who loves you, it's not too late. Make the call. Say the words. Don't wait for a crisis to see the love that's already there." As Marcus prepared to leave for college, we spent our last weeks together finishing the Mustang. The night before he left, we finally got it running, the engine purring like it had when it was new. We took it for a drive, windows down, classic rock playing on the restored radio. "This was Mom's favorite song," Marcus said as Dreams by Fleetwood Mac came on. We drove in comfortable silence, father and son, the years of pain and misunderstanding finally behind us. As we pulled back into the driveway, Marcus said, "Dad, I want you to know something. Every time I step on a court, every achievement I earn, it's not just mine, it's ours. You paid for it in more ways than money." I turned off the engine, letting his words settle. "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become. Not the basketball player, the man." Marcus smiled, that crooked grin that was pure Sarah. "I learned from the best. Both of you." The morning Marcus left for college, I helped him load his car, the same beat-up Honda he'd once been embarrassed by, now his most prized possession, because I'd taught him to maintain it himself. Among his bags was a framed photo from the trial aftermath, him and me on the courthouse steps, both looking exhausted but united. "For my dorm room," he explained. "So I remember what matters." As he drove away, I didn't feel the emptiness I'd expected. Instead, I felt complete. We'd been broken and rebuilt stronger. The foundation Sarah and I had laid hadn't crumbled, it had just been tested. That evening, I sat in the garage with the Mustang, now fully restored. On the workbench was a new project, building a website for parents dealing with similar situations. Marcus called it our next restoration project. He was right. We'd restored our relationship. Now we could help others restore theirs. 3 months into Marcus's freshman year, I got a call from him, excited and breathless. "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Remember that kid Kevin from my team? The quiet one whose grandparents raised him?" I remembered. The boy Johnson had convinced to ignore his grandparents' advice. "What about him?" Marcus's voice was full of pride. He reached out after listening to the podcast. He reconciled with his grandparents. "They're coming to his senior night. He wanted me to thank you." These calls became regular, kids and parents finding their way back to each other inspired by our story. Each one felt like a small victory against the damage Johnson had done. During Marcus's winter break, he came home with an idea. "Dad, what if we wrote a book together? Our story, but also a guide for families. Warning signs to watch for, how to rebuild trust, the whole thing." We spent the break outlining chapters, remembering painful moments, but also discovering new insights. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said one evening as we worked. "Johnson was so successful because he offered what seemed easier than the truth. It was easier to blame you than to deal with losing Mom. Easier to believe in a villain than accept that sometimes life just hurts." The wisdom in his words amazed me. This was Sarah's legacy too, raising a son who could face hard truths. As I sit here now, putting the finishing touches on our story, I'm struck by how far we've come. Marcus is thriving in college, playing basketball with joy rather than desperation, studying psychology with a focus on family dynamics, He still calls every few days, sometimes just to talk about nothing important. The podcast has helped hundreds of families. The book will hopefully help more. But the real victory is simpler. My son knows I love him and I know he loves me. No one can ever convince us otherwise again. The financial cost of those years, the $50,000, seems insignificant now compared to what we nearly lost and what we ultimately found. We discovered that love isn't measured in presence at games, but in sacrifice without recognition. It's not in the cheering from the stands, but in the working of overtime shifts. It's not in being the fun parent, but in being the parent who shows up in whatever way they can, even when that way is misunderstood. Coach Johnson is serving his time, but more importantly, his methods have been exposed. Schools across the country have implemented new oversight measures. Parents are more aware, more involved, more protective of their relationships with their children. Marcus likes to say we turned poison into medicine, and maybe we did. Last week, Marcus sent me a photo from his dorm room. He'd put up a new sign next to our courthouse picture and his mother's photo. It read, "A father's love isn't always visible, but it's always present. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it feels like distance. But it's always, always there." Below it, he'd added his own words. "I was blind for 3 years. Now I see everything. Thanks, Dad." I printed the photo and put it in the garage next to the restored Mustang, next to Sarah's picture, next to all the evidence of a life built on love, tested by trials, and ultimately triumphant. This is our story, mine and Marcus's, but also yours if you've ever been misunderstood. Ever been called pathetic while sacrificing everything? Ever been told you don't care by the very people you care most about? The truth always surfaces. Love always wins. It just sometimes takes longer than we'd like. If you found yourself in this story, if you've seen your own family and our struggles, remember that it's never too late to rebuild. Marcus and I are living proof that relationships can be restored, trust can be regained, and love can overcome even the most calculated manipulation. Don't wait for tomorrow to reach out to someone you've pushed away or to forgive someone who's hurt you. Don't let pride or pain keep you from the relationships that matter most. And please, if this story touched you, if it opened your eyes to something in your own life, share it with others who might need to hear it. Like this video if it resonated with you. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family, forgiveness, or finding your way back to each other. Subscribe to hear more stories of redemption and reconciliation, because every family has a story worth telling, worth healing, worth celebrating. Remember, the strongest families aren't those who never face trials. They're those who face them together, even when together looks different than we expected. Thank you for being part of our journey. Now go be part of your own.